Welcome to today's little mini class. Today, I thought we'd work on some of the resources and some of the skills that you can acquire to help you better navigate really strong and unpleasant emotions. Did you know that when we experience pain, it hits the same part of the brain as if we are physically in threat? Therefore, emotional pain and physical pain hit the same part of the brain. Yep, you heard me. So when we feel those really strong emotions and when we're actually feeling like we're being attacked by a loved one, or when we've had something activated inside of ourselves and we're feeling rage or hurt or disappointment or abandonment, that our body actually reacts and responds as though literally our partners or our loved ones are causing us incredible threat. And we can then go into like a survival mode, into a reactionary kind of fight, flight, freeze response. We do that because we perceive we're in danger. The thing is we're not in danger. Emotional pain and physical pain does hit the same part of the brain, but we actually have the ability to be able to skill ourselves so that we can have more resource and more stability and more consistency inside of our lives when it comes to emotions, so that emotions aren't running the show. I mean, the most frightening thing is when emotions are actually having the conversation for us. I mean, one of my other talks about how we need to regulate and how we need to soothe ourselves so that we can take care of ourselves, so we can respond in situations versus react, because reaction's not going to get us the outcome that we want. It's actually going to cause more conflict. But today we're looking at the problem of emotions and how we do go into survival mode when we actually feel flooded with emotions. Literally, the brain floods. I mean, the amygdala, which is our animal brain, sits there. And when we perceive that we've actually got danger, it floods and we go into a survival mode of fight, flight, freeze. It sends cortisol, stress enzymes all through our bodies. So our physical being is actually reacting as though we're being attacked. And yet what we're really doing is we're feeling difficult emotions. It's really quite simple when we start to resource and when you know how to actually be able to be with difficult and strong emotions without actually reacting and projecting to our loved ones. So the first thing we have to really realize is that emotions aren't good or bad, and they're not negative or positive. Emotions are just emotions. And everything we feel for a reason. Emotions are actually necessary, including the bad ones. So the thing is, we need to start to unpack this societal norm that, anything that's uncomfortable is bad. I mean, the reality is discomfort is required for growth. Nobody woke up in the morning and said, oh my God, my life is perfect, let me change something. What we usually do is hit the proverbial bottom, or something gets so bad in our lives that it causes us to actually have to do something about it. But wouldn't it be great if we actually learned how to resource ourselves emotionally, build an emotional scope, an emotional capacity, and emotional resilience inside of ourselves, that our unpleasant and uncomfortable emotions actually become the gift? Yep, you heard me, the gift. I don't necessarily like my unpleasant and uncomfortable emotions, but I welcome them, because I know that they're the signal and the indicator that there's something going on for me that needs attention. I mean, just think about it. How do you know that you have a piece of glass in your foot? You feel pain, right? Pain, discomfort. And that pain sends a signal to your body and you go, oh my God, there's something going on here. And the thing is if we actually avoid that pain, it actually starts to get worse, doesn't it? I mean, if we left a piece of glass in our foot, it would get into our body, our bloodstream, we'd get sick, we might get inflamed. I actually worked with a doctor once that I used this analogy with, and she said that the client had to have, or that patient had to have their arm amputated. I mean, because they'd avoided a splinter, because they didn't want to dig around in it. And that's what we tend to do with our emotional pain. We don't want to dig around in it because we're frightened we're going to fall into it. And that's one of two things that can happen. We can either avoid it, distract ourselves, dissociate, drink, drug, sex, binge, purge, starve, exercise, gamble, anything so we don't have to feel our unpleasant or uncomfortable emotions. Or the other thing we do is we fall into them. So there's two different responses. And there's a reason why. It's because people who fall into their emotions don't know how to resource themselves with the emotions. I mean, frequently people have felt sad and then they become sad. People have felt depressed, angry, and then they become depressed and angry. And that's the risk, right? Is that we're going to fall into our emotions, that we won't be able to handle it because we've never actually learned how to resource ourselves or handle our difficult or painful emotions. So we don't want to fall in. So the next step is, why don't I run away from it and avoid it, pretend it's not there, ignore the piece of glass in the foot. But once we learn how to skill ourselves, once we have the right kind of utensils, like with a piece of glass, soak the foot, you let the pores open up, you get a light, you ask for some help, you get some tweezers, you get a needle and you dig around. And of course, it feels more uncomfortable to begin with. Like when you're first digging around, it's like, ow, ow, ow. But eventually, once you get that piece of glass out, then you can put your foot on the ground immediately. And guess what? No discomfort anymore. You've actually returned to ease. And that's the nature of emotions, right? The nature of emotions is to bring a signal to you that something's going on. Something needs to be dug around in. But what we do is we get frightened and overwhelmed. Frequently, we react to those emotions because we haven't resourced ourselves and skilled ourselves of how to be with our emotion. Let it be there. I mean, every emotion has a purpose. Every emotion is quite appropriate. When things are threatening to me and I feel angry or like something in unjust occurs, I will experience the feeling of anger because anger is frequently about injustice and unfairness. It's letting me know there's been a boundary violation. If I ignore that anger, I put myself at risk. So if I feel that feeling and I learn to tend to that emotion in a constructive way, I can actually create safety or protection for myself or even change. The same thing with boredom. Many people struggle with boredom and they really get threatened by the emotion of boredom or tiredness. Instead of actually tending to that emotion, they react to it or they get frightened of it and they see it as problematic. And yet it's really just a signal that something might be missing in your life, or you're working too hard, or there's a need for you to actually become more adventurous or try something new. Every emotion has its purpose. But if we don't turn toward the emotion, surely enough, we'll fall into it eventually, and then it consumes us. And what we need to do is learn how to be with the emotion. We need to resource ourselves and learn how to sit with comfortably and spaciously and tend to those emotions. So what I'd like to work with today is really learning how to deal with those emotions and what skills are needed. First and foremost would probably be a vocabulary around emotions. I mean, frequently we are not taught or given a vast vocabulary of emotions. If anything, our society actually tries to get us to not express any unpleasant and uncomfortable emotions. We want to be upbeat and happy, and we don't want to hear about all the bad stuff. So we tend not to be vulnerable and open with our feelings. We tend to want to pretend that everything's fine, and then we suppress and we deny, and of course what we suppress depresses us, or those anxious feelings of all that emotion inside of our body that eventually stir up, and when they stir up inside of us, oh my gosh, they're like the big gigantic piece of glass in our foot. So we need to learn how to have a language that we can connect to within ourselves. We're taught happy, bad, mad, and sad. But each emotion, if we bracket down, has an incredible array of words which can really help us connect more intimately with what's going on. Let's look at anger, for example. So anger could be irate, nervous, frustrated, disturbed, pissed off, agitated, annoyed. There's so many different levels of emotions, but until we actually start to dig in to that piece of glass and pull around to find out what it is that we're actually feeling, we don't really create that intimacy with that emotion. But let's just say we use an example of noticing a signal, an action inside of the body. And then from that point, what we do is go, what am I feeling? Okay, what I'm feeling is angry, and what's beneath the anger? It might be frustration. No, I'm annoyed. Yep, it's annoyed. I'm definitely, and we feel it inside of our bodies when we know what it is. So what I'm feeling is annoyed. Okay, great. So then being able to hold space for annoyed and saying, okay, annoyed, talk to me. As if your emotions were a small child. Imagine how different you would be with them if you saw them as a small child. Hi, annoyed. What have you got to tell me? What is your story? Again, this is like digging around the piece of glass in your foot, and it might be uncomfortable, and you're sitting with it and you're feeling the annoyed while you're there, but you're actually serving justice to that emotion. And annoyed will say, well, do you know what? You've done the dishes 3 times this week, and every time you come to the sink, your husband has left the dishes there for you. What do you think I am? Do you think I'm your servant or your slave? And you just expect me to do that. You don't value my time. You don't respect me at all. And then all of a sudden, annoyed has a really strong story that it's trying to tell you. And instead of falling into that story and then believing that narrative and projecting it onto your partner, you don't respect me, you annoy me so much, it's really about, again, holding space and being intimate with that annoyance and being able to go, hello, annoyed. I hear your story. Thank you for sharing. What is it that you'd actually like to be feeling, or what is it that you would need to be different so that you no longer were there, much like the piece of glass, so I can take it out. And in that moment, what we're going to do is we're going to go, so annoyed is actually the signal for an unmet need. So, what do you think annoyed's needing? I start to dig around inside of myself and I go, okay, as I'm checking in. So annoyed might want my partner to stop leaving a dish. My annoyed might want me to create a dishwashing schedule. Annoyed might actually feel like it's not being respected and want to check in on the story that I'm not being respected inside of my relationship. You know, we've got to be careful of our stories and projecting those narratives and those emotions onto our partners. Because I don't want to come and project that anger or that annoyance onto my partner. I want to check out what's happening for me first. I want to get really, really clear. And then I want to be able to bring the feeling, the unmet need, an action and a resource that would change that. So a need or an action to take, and then how that would make me feel. So once we connect to what it is, we start to identify that it might be annoyed really wants my partner to clean his dishes as he goes. And that would make me feel respected. So then it's about, I've got a very clear identification, what annoyed's trying to tell me, what annoyed is needing, and what annoyed wants to feel. And then being able to communicate that to your loved one. So once we get to this stage in which we've identified what it is that we're feeling and what it is that we're needing, it really creates a space for us to be able to meet our partners in a different way. Instead of bringing the conflict and bringing the emotion, having the emotion have the conversation, we tend to begin to have more constructive and accountable conversations around needs that are not being met. Now, this is going to be a huge interrupter towards conflict inside of your relationship. But it also builds the capacity emotionally for you to start to tend to your emotions and have your emotions less driving the vehicle and more having you in charge. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't want my emotions driving the vehicle. I want to be responsible for my own emotions. I want to be checking in, and I want to be the one who's actually in control. So when we start to build this ability to be able to become more intimate with our emotions, creating a culture of curiosity around what it is that I'm feeling, what it is I'm needing, and what's the action to take that would actually create difference inside of that feeling, I begin to become more empowered and more proactive, and therefore more grounded inside of myself, inside of my relationships. That's emotional intelligence, the ability to be able to respond to our emotions versus react with them. So we can do this with many different emotions. When our partners have triggered us emotionally, we can take it to a deeper level. So in conflict, when something's happening, we can actually feel hurt, wounded, rejected, abandoned. And beneath that is actually a sub-story, usually grounded inside of woundedness, worthlessness, not enoughness. We tend to have our values rubbed of not being respected, not being cared for, not being listened to, not being heard. And these emotions become the signal that these really deep needs are not being met. And again, instead of reacting emotionally to, you're not listening to me or you don't care about me anymore, we can really connect to my sadness, my emptiness, my disconnect, my hurt is trying to communicate to me that I actually feel like we're not spending enough time together, or my disappointment is that, I really feel like you're spending too much time at work and you're not investing in the relationship. So we begin to use the emotions as the signal to uncover the unmet need. And that's just it. The emotions are the signal towards a greater gift that can really enrich our lives and enrich our actions so that we can actually move towards constructive, healthy, functioning relationships with ourselves and with others. So when we actually start to see emotions as the signal, and we actually start to hold space for them in a constructive, in a compassionate, in a tending way, then they start to become the gift. They're just a small part of a very productive and constructive action. And the more we avoid those, the less we have the ability to be able to address the issues that are not being met. Our problems or our pains never get resourced and they never get healed or solved. So again, the value of being able to be intimate with your emotions and being able to tend to and communicate and have intimacy with your feelings, see them as the signal that they are. Actually, once that's resourced and you're skilled at that, they can create so much benefit and so much gain in your life. No longer are your emotions running the show because you're running away from them or falling into them. You begin to use them as just a simple signal to create action, productivity, change, correction, and growth inside of your life. So I promise you, when you start to build this relationship with your emotions, creating an emotional vocabulary, becoming intimate, curious, tending to, compassionate, kind, and spacious with your feelings, they can send you a message that will change your life.